Alright, I always unlock the inverted takedown first, because this never gets old.
Sure it came from over there.
I hope you're as excited as I am because in this episode of Great Levels in Gaming, we're looking at Rocksteady's Batman Arkham Asylum. Released in 2009, it's the first in the Arkham series, and right up until the release of its 2011 sequel, Arkham City, it was considered by many to be the greatest game ever made based on a comic. I want to warn you right away, if you haven't played this game yet and would have any interest in doing so, and I highly recommend that you do, you should stop this video right now and not come back until you have, since the main focus of this video is strongest the first time you experience it, and without any prior knowledge of it. The last thing that I want to do is to spoil such an awesome moment for you, and this is a discussion aimed at the audience that's already played the whole game. Okay, are they gone? Okay, good, let's get started. My absolute favorite parts of this game are the Scarecrow sequences. They're atmospheric, visually arresting, and they're the moments that best reflect the Asylum's theme of insanity. From a writing perspective, they're one of my favorite examples of the rule of three building upon one another steadily up to a big payoff, and in a way that informs you of just enough to understand them on a base level, but leaving enough unclear that you're rewarded for paying close attention to what's going on and thinking like Batman, the world's greatest detective. Your first encounter with Scarecrow in the medical facility serves as the introduction to the mechanics that really make the Scarecrow events, or so you're made to think. Joker initially hints at what's coming in an offhand remark as you save the doctors in the facility, and when he tells Batman,
"Prepare to face your fears. All of them!"
as the elevator fills with Dr. Crane's fear gas. You see glimpses of Scarecrow before the gas takes effect, and it's followed by the skewed camera angle, haunting audio, and of course Batman's glowing orange eyes. The eyes in particular serve to act as something of a misdirection too, as we'll see in a little bit. These all appear at once, and right after you see Scarecrow, to make it clear that something abnormal is occurring and it has something to do with Scarecrow, but Rocksteady smartly avoids stating explicitly just what that is. Even the gas, which manifests itself as a slight shimmer in the air and can therefore be easily missed, is focused on, just in a couple of more subtle ways. First, the elevator scene is designed to make the shimmer noticeable since it visibly distorts the screen on which you see the Joker. Because that's the point of visual focus, this lets Rocksteady be reasonably certain that you'll notice the gas without directly pointing it out. The closest they ever get to doing so is when Batman mentions the gas offhand in his internal monologue only after the event has finished. If you haven't been paying attention, it's entirely possible that you might not make the association between the two, so you're responsible for your own knowledge here. Not only does this encourage you to think the way that the great detective would himself, but it's also a smart way to potentially build tension. Anything left unknown just serves to make future encounters more suspenseful since you're less able to predict what's coming. The gameplay in this nightmare world makes sense since Batman knows that as long as he's weakened under the influence of Crane's gas, he needs to simply avoid confrontation and letting Crane know where he is. All told, this serves well as an introduction to set the tone for later events and teaches you the mechanics that the game wants you to come to expect. The second Scarecrow event is important for both its similarities to and its differences from the encounter in the medical facility. Just like before, we see the telltale shimmer of Crane's gas as we leave the room, along with Batman's cough, and almost immediately after, we get the tilted camera as well. However, the tilt is less obvious than before, we don't hear the same music as in the first section, Batman's cough is less pronounced, and the build-up is quicker as a result of Scarecrow increasing the dose of toxin that the Dark Knight is exposed to. The most important differences are the lack of Batman's glowing eyes compared to the first section, and that you don't catch even a glimpse of Scarecrow before his gas takes effect. In fact, Joker actually misdirects you by mentioning Zsasz as you leave the library, and this is important to the main message of this event. A number of elements return, establishing a pattern and giving you something to look for moving forward, but because major aspects of the first event aren't there, the game implicitly tells you that you can never really trust what you see, even if you think it's a clear indication of what's coming. Making you question what you see is consistent with Fear Toxin's effects and brings your thoughts in line with Batman's during these sequences. Additionally, it's the first sign of the game using these scenes not just to mess with Batman, but with you, the player, outside of the game itself. This is incredibly important as setup for the third and final encounter. Let's take a look at the opening of this event before we get into the meat of what makes it so great.
Did anyone catch the game last night?
Okay, full disclosure, this scene does so many different things and does them all so well that I was actually at a bit of a loss for where to start when I was writing this. I think that the gaps in time between the encounters really help in understanding the final event. After your run-in with Scarecrow in the medical facility, you go straight to Arkham Mansion where he proceeds to ambush you again. By setting the first two encounters so close to one another, the similarities between them are made more noticeable. This allows you in turn to establish a pattern, learning the telltale signs that let you anticipate the event, such as the gas and the coughing. Between events 2 and 3, however, we have Dr. Young's death in the mansion, tracking Harley to the cell block and saving the warden, hunting down the Joker's secret lab in the garden, Poison Ivy's interrogation, going back to the mansion to meet up with Cash, and finally to intensive treatment where the last event takes place. The sheer volume of major plot points that happen before the third encounter seems to me to be an intentional design decision to make it likely that Scarecrow isn't at the forefront of your mind by the time of the crash. Additionally, the signature haze and Batman's cough are more subtle in this scene than the others, so Rocksteady makes it as tough as possible to anticipate what's coming even if you do know the signs. What's more, the sudden nature of the event's opening stands in such stark contrast to those of the first two that even if you're braced for a Scarecrow encounter like them, you'll still be caught off guard since the crash is so different from any other event in the game. The signs are there, to make it fair, but the game does everything it can to stack the deck against you to make sure that you're surprised when the crash happens. And that brings us to the $64,000 question. Why does Rocksteady work so hard to establish this false sense of security that makes sure that you can't see this coming? Sure, it's cool, but what makes it more than that? Well, you'll remember what I mentioned before about never quite being able to trust what you see, and this is the payoff that these scenes have been building up to. Just like Batman in the first two sequences, you've been presented with something that you can't be sure is real, making you question whether or not you can trust what you're seeing. This is exactly what Crane's hallucinogenic fear toxin does to its victims, in this case Batman, so by making you feel this way, the game is in a sense getting the gas to affect you as well. As I've mentioned before, one of the best ways that a developer can engage you in a game is to make you feel what your character is feeling, and in this scene you're just as mistrustful of what you see as Batman is. Between the crash itself and the use the middle stick taunt on the false game over screen, you don't trust anything that you see on screen the first time you play this section. This parallels Batman's recognition of when he's been drugged and his response to know not to trust his wits and to avoid Scarecrow's gaze as best as he can. Batman's doubts about his reality are not just limited to what he sees though. Across all of these events, you see flashes of Batman replaced with Scarecrow as you're climbing around in his world or fighting skeletons, and after the last nightmare's conclusion, Scarecrow taunts Batman.
Why fight it, Batman? You're as crazy as the rest of us.
This is Batman's ultimate fear, that the death of his parents left him insane, and it's the reason for his one rule, because if he were to kill, even once, then he would just confirm to himself that he's no different from the madmen he hunts. So he lives in constant fear that the reality that he's created for himself isn't true. And although Arkham Asylum protects Gotham from Batman's greatest enemies, it's also a constant reminder and threat of what awaits him if his deepest fear becomes real. That is what this moment helps you to understand. More than any other part of Arkham Asylum, the final Scarecrow encounter helps you to understand the complex relationship between Batman and the Asylum itself and what it represents. And it does so by making you feel what he feels. Ultimately, it's because this is communicated not verbally but emotionally that the crash is so frighteningly effective. Thank you for watching. I'd love to see your opinions both in the comments and at the Great Levels in Gaming email address listed in the description. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you'll join me again next time to take a look at another Great Level in Gaming.